Good morning. We have our member, Debbie Goodwin, here today, and we are blessed to have her speaking. She is going to be speaking on Sarah and has a book coming out next year. And so maybe she'll give us a little taste of what's going on with that and about Sarah, that things we maybe never thought about, I'm sure. Debbie, thank you.
Well, that is true. For the last 10 years, I have been in a significant study plan working with the story of Sarah. Started by a Sunday school class, women's Sunday school class 10 years ago. Once a year, I would take a story of a woman from the Bible and do a series. And I thought, I've never done a Bible study on Sarah. So I decided to do her. And as I got into it, I found out a couple of things. A lot of parts of the story I had never heard of, never had been preached. Certainly wouldn't be covered in a vacation Bible school story. You'll understand why if you know anything about her story. Um, but also, I found out there is no book on the entire life of Sarah in what I call the accessible category. There are some books, but I don't think you'd want to read them. I mean, they're deep and complicated, and I wanted a book that would relate. So that's what I've done. This morning, I'm going to talk a little bit about some journeys that she did, which is treating the story a lot differently than the way I've done it in the book. So I won't be doing it especially chronologically, nor will I do all of the parts of her story. I do want you to know that I've been, most of you know, I've been writing for the last 40 years, published various things, mostly through the Nazarene denomination, a cousin of the United Methodists. I've got a sign-up sheet if you're interested, because we've got some new people. I do a blog every 2 weeks, devotional, inspirational, non-political, in case you're interested. But if you're interested in signing up or taking a card and doing it on your own, that's right there, the green clipboard. I decided you don't need another thing passed around. So yeah, thank you. Thank you. Okay. So as I get into her story, I want to know what you already know about the story of Sarah. So would some of you just tell us some of the information you think most people know or you know for sure? What are some things?
Abraham's wife.
Abraham's wife. Yeah, there's a good place to start and that's one of the reasons we don't hear about Sarah, because she was married to a very famous person in the Bible, Abraham, and everyone needs to tell Abraham's story. And Sarah Gunny is a walk-on, especially when she does something wrong. So, what else? Anything else?
Had a child when she was old.
Yes, like 90. Anybody ever prayed for a child at 90? Don't think that'll answer one of my prayers. That's an interesting part of the story. Anything else?
Steve.
Couldn't conceive. Yes. Well,
Speak.
couldn't.
Well, she told the Lord she couldn't have laughed at.
Oh, she laughed at him. Yes, she just rejected it when someone tried to tell her, you're gonna have a baby, and no, I'm not. Anything else?
He called her his sister somewhere.
Yes, and we're going to get to that today. So hold that thought. So I'm not going to relieve. Some of us don't know that part of the story. Yeah, so I love telling parts of the Bible that you've never heard. So some of that will come out today. I found three overarching things that I had never heard anyone tell me about Sarah as I read and studied this story. The first one is that Sarah's story demonstrates how God chose Sarah to be the covenant partner of Abraham. Chose Sarah. Sarah was an add-on. She wasn't a mistake. She wasn't, oh, you're just a troublesome woman. What am I going to do with you? I see God's hand working as choosing Sarah. But now, at the beginning of her story, she wasn't ready to be all that God wanted her to be. Have any of us been? We're all a work in process. And so to give that permission for Sarah to be a work that God continues to shape is a very important story to us. We don't click our fingers and she becomes who we thought she should be. And we don't click our fingers and do that for ourselves either. I also see that Sarah's story shows us how God did not give up on Sarah when she tried to control her own situation. He didn't give up on her. And we need to know that God does not give up on us either. And probably the most important to me is that God raised his hand for Sarah to protect her in her most vulnerable situation that she did not cause and could not, by any stretch of the imagination, get herself out of. It was either God or nothing. Now, that's a pretty important point. And it tells me God had a plan for Sarah, and we need to understand that. I think she's like us in so many ways, tired of waiting for answers that didn't come. Anybody sat in that waiting room before? Ready to do things our way. If God isn't going to act, well, he must want me to do my own thing. Or ready to blame God or somebody else when things didn't go my way. Yes, we understand that kind of thinking. So you should be able to relate to Sarah. In the same way that we tell so many male stories in the Bible, and us women learn lessons too, this is a female story, and you guys can learn a few lessons as well. The story shows us how God works with people that aren't ready to make a full surrender. Now, you may have a different opinion of Sarah because you just assumed some things about her. I may break through some of those assumptions. I can't prove everything that I believe about the story, so you can have a different idea about some of it, and we can't prove some of the things. At the beginning of the story, we know three things, and this part of the story is told in chapter Genesis 11, and we're beginning to get to the genealogy of Abram. And I'm not going to go through all that genealogy. That's a different study. Yeah, but we do find out that it's not Sarah in chapter 11. Her name is Sarai. That was her birth name. She was named Sari, and it meant princess. Now, fathers were the ones who named the children. Now, it doesn't mean the mothers didn't have any say in it. It's just that the last word came down from the father. So the father names his daughter princess. What do you think that means? He was ready to spoil somebody. So I have always pictured Sarah, since this study, as someone who, in her early years, probably got her way a lot of times. Maybe by, wrinkling up her face and saying, "Please, Daddy." And some of you men have wilted at the same. But she was also born and spent her early life in Ur of the Chaldees. At least we assume that. We know that one of Abram's sons is identified as being born in Ur of the Chaldees, and most of the scholars believe the whole family was born in Ur of the Chaldees, including Sarah. This was a civilization hub at this time. This was a trade center. Well, in trade centers, what do? You get the things that your own region doesn't produce, can't manufacture. So she's in the lap of luxury, so to speak. Now, if we transported into Ur of the Chaldees, we would not call it luxury. But at this time, the best of the best was available to her. She was born in a wealthy family. And so I have an idea that her father brought home nice things for little princess. And she got used to living among nice things. She married Abram. It was an arranged marriage, probably, and Abram came from Terah, and he was a wealthy owner of livestock, and not the most wealthy in the Ur of Chaldees, but a man of good standing. So I think when she begins her married life, marrying a man who is the oldest son who will inherit all of the wealth of his father, she's got it made, right? She's got a wonderful life. So she has her dreams of a family, dreams of nice living, dreams of a place in community. Okay? Everything is set until it's not. We do learn the fact that you brought up her barrenness. We learn this in chapter 11 before we talk about any of Sarah's story. The storyteller, who is probably Moses, is wanting us to know. Now, you've read, those of you who are fiction readers, you've read books that give you clues about things that the people in the book don't know yet. But you are supposed to carry this knowledge so that you can keep up with what's happening to lead the person toward understanding this. And it says very clearly in chapter 11 that Sarah was unable to become pregnant and had no children at the very beginning of her story. But Sarah doesn't know that. She can't know that the first year of marriage. Maybe she is still a little hopeful the second year, explains it away certain ways. Maybe the third, but by the fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth year of marriage and no children, while every woman around her is having a child a year, there's something wrong. And of course, in this time, barrenness was a blight from God. You've done something wrong. You're not his. He's not looking after you. We don't have this group of people truly being a people after God's heart, let's say, but there was still that cultural awareness that you had done something wrong and this was a blight because of it. So she's, what does she do in a circle of new moms? What does she do when her servants are having more babies than she is? How does she feel? Left out, forgotten. There's some other characteristics we'll discover later. I want to talk about the journeys that Sarah took, that God took Sarah on, I should say it that way, because this is a shaping journey, and we have to see the whole story before we make any conclusions about who Sarah is becoming. We can't say it at the very beginning. The first journey that she takes is a journey of transition. We all know this part of the story. You may not know that Abram's father, Terah, had decided for some reason that is not explained in scripture, although there are some people who are making some guesses, why he decided to move part of his family to Haran. That's 600 miles away. Do you realize how far away from Ur 600 miles is in those days by camel or donkey ride? Yeah, that's a long way. It was on the way to Canaan. Some scholars want to give him credit for trying to get his family in the direction of God for some reason. Others just make the fact that God is using what Terah did to get his family out of Ur. Haran was also a trade center and a smaller civilization center, but not as big as Ur. And so I'm not sure Sarah's life changed much in that move. She probably still had a semi-permanent stone house, a lot of little niceties, or at least she could have brought a few of them along with her. And so she's able to appoint her little home with some of the things that she likes. And so she's living. I call her a city girl. She was raised in the city. Okay? She was raised in the city. And she was probably raised with servants. So when God then the next thing that happens is that the father of Abram dies, leaving the family in Haran, taking, now Abraham is the leader of the family and he has to make all the decisions. Isn't it interesting that God waits until Terah is gone to give his first communication to Abraham? You'll find out why I think that is extremely crucial piece of information. We know that God said, leave your country, everything you know. And I mean, that's what they had done from Ur, but now do it again. Leave your country and your family and go to where I'm going to tell you. This time, the name of the place that you're going to is where I will tell you. That's not much of a name. Try putting that one on GPS. It won't work. But that's what God was telling Abram. What we don't know, and some people assume, you can if you want, it can't be proved one way or the other. We don't know what Abram told Sarah. It's not in the Bible. We don't know how much of God's communication he told Sarah. Maybe a lot, maybe none. I take the position, not very much. He didn't have to. He didn't have to. All he had to say is, start packing. We're leaving. And that was it. I don't know. I still think she probably asked the three most important questions. When are we moving? Where are we going? And what kind of house am I going to live in? Because those are the questions I always ask Mark when we were leaving. I needed to know, how many days do I have to put all this stuff in boxes? And where are we going to empty those boxes? I need to investigate the city. I need to find out about the grocery stores, the medical system, the school systems, all of that. And then, of course, what kind of house will we have? I still remember when we moved from Bryan to St. Louis, I think it was. I had always said I will never let a parsonage, a house that a church has bought, be a problem with me and the people until I saw the orange shag carpet. And I decorated with burgundy. Well, the end of that story was that some women came to my rescue without my saying a word. They were appalled as I was appalled and said, this has to go. And it did. Anyway. So anyway, those are important questions, but Sarah doesn't get any of the answers to any of those. What I do find out in this move that God is taking them on, and it's a long move, is that this is a transition. And if anyone needed a transition, it probably was Sarah, who was used to niceties and now would not have any for a very long time. They stayed in tents. I don't know where you hang your pictures in a tent. Somebody had to make a fire every time they moved. They had to stay close to the water and bring the water it was all of that work every single time. You just barely get your rhythm going, and time to move. We'll move again. We'll move again. We'll move again. Why was this moving transition important to both of them, both Sarah and Abraham? And these are the answers that I found out. that for me, it answers that question. This is 10 generations after the flood. 10 generations. Now, I tried to do the math and make it come out with some of what some of the scholars were saying, and I miserably failed. My husband understands that completely. There, and I never could find one answer to this question. So I don't deal with the years. I can count the generations. There were 10 generations. I don't know about you, but I don't know any names 10 generations ago in my family because we don't pass on those things the way they did then. 10 generations away. I fear, this is my personal opinion, I fear that sometimes we over spiritualize Abraham and Sarah. We expect them to know more about God than they actually did at that time. And I have reasons to present to you that support why I'm saying this. Two facts especially. God is only mentioned 2 times between God saying to Noah and giving him a covenant of promise after he comes to land for the first time, and when God comes to Abraham. 2 times. One is simply in connection with a man named Nimrod, and they only say he was a hunter before the Lord, and that's all we know about him. And then the last one where God's name is mentioned is at the Tower of Babel, and that was a reprimand. That's all the word we have between those 2 times in the Bible. Doesn't mean there wasn't more, but it wasn't recorded. But there's still another fact that underpins all of this that you may or may not know. In Joshua 24, the 2nd verse, when Joshua is getting ready to take the Israelites into Promised Land and giving that last very important speech and trying to get them ready to go into the Promised Land, he says this, and I quote, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Long ago, your forefathers, including Terah, the father of Abraham, and Nahor, his son," there was one other son who had already died, so that's why he's not mentioned, "lived beyond the river and worshipped other gods." Abram was raised worshiping other gods too? That's what it says. So God is trying to get them out of a cultural center where this is happening on the road where it doesn't happen as much, so he can get his message very clearly across to Abraham. Now, so it doesn't bother me that this is a shaping journey, that God is shaping both Abram and Sarah. What's our lesson? Well, sometimes there's point A, and we know we got to get to point B, and between the two is a transition. Sometimes it means packing boxes. Sometimes it means reordering your heart to have a place for different understandings or desires or whatever, or people. But there's a transition. I still remember the longest transition I had between moves was the one between St. Louis and Centralia, Washington, when Mark had to go 6 weeks before we had sold a house and before Lisa could finish school. Just wasn't appropriate to take her out of school. So Lisa and I stayed back for 6 weeks. 6 weeks. And we couldn't go back to the church that we left because it just wasn't appropriate. They were in the middle of choosing new pastors and all of that. And it wasn't good. It's a good thing that I could make the drive to Kansas City where my family lived. And I did that a couple of times. I even went to Indianapolis during that time when Carol and Alan were living in Indianapolis. Hitched a ride with somebody I found out was going to Indianapolis. And so I headed that direction. Did whatever I could to make this transition get over. And yet, the more God disconnected me from what was past, either on his own or with my help, usually we have to be pried away from what we have become comfortable with so that he could get me ready for a new place. Well, by the time I got there, I was ready for new relationships. I was ready to have a new house and get ready to do more things. I was ready on the inside, and God could do more with that because I was ready on the inside. Transitions. I don't like them. I've never asked for one. I've never prayed for one, but they come. And I've learned that if I will let God use them, they will help me be ready more quickly for what God is wanting to show me in the next situation. And again, it's not always a geographical move. Sometimes it's a move in the heart or the head or both. Then there's another journey that she was taking, the journey of vulnerability. Sarah had to take two specific journeys where she was placed in the most vulnerable positions of her life, not of her doing. When Abram moved from Haran, got on the rocky road, however they went, and eventually he got to the land, the area called the Negev, the semi-desert part of the desert. I learned that in this part it would rain. It was, very shallow, so the rain wouldn't stay, but it could grow a little bit, and the sheep and cattle could graze for a little bit until it rained again, and it was good grazing land because it reproduced a little bit. But then, as soon as somewhere in the time that they had gotten into this area that Abram assumed was a good place, a huge famine hit the land, a serious famine that was going to lead to death if they didn't get food. It was this very serious famine, like some of the ones we've heard of in Africa. Now, he needed to go someplace where he could get some food, and where's the logical place to go? Anybody know? Egypt, Publix. Well, yes, but not then. Egypt. Egypt was the breadbasket of the world. Why? The Nile River. And most of you know, and some of you have done it too, have been on that trip down the Nile. And you've seen on the banks of the Nile, I mean, it's just lush. But you get very far away from that, and it's not. It's lots of sand and camel dung. There was one problem with this trip that Abram was taking to Egypt, and he waited until he just almost got there to make this situation known. And this is what it says in Genesis 12, verse 11. As Abram, was approaching the border of Egypt, Abram said to his wife, Sarah, "Look, you are a very beautiful woman." Now, this was not just Abram trying to suck up to his wife. This was not just that kind of compliment that, he's wanting something. So, I'll say the best thing that could make her day. You are so beautiful. She was known as a beautiful woman throughout the Bible, and throughout this story, it comes up again. Even later in life, when we wouldn't expect her beauty to be as prominent as it was. You're a beautiful woman. And why is that a problem? Look, when the Egyptians see you, they will say, well, this is his wife. Let's kill him and we can have her. So please tell them you are my sister, and then they will spare my life and treat me well because of their interest in you. Now, does that sound like a good plan to you? I'm saying, Abram, I see that this plan will protect you. Now, exactly how will it protect Sarah? How do you expect to get out of Egypt with her? That's what I wanted to know. And I've never asked it anytime I've listened to this story until I was studying it so carefully. Interesting thing about Egyptian morals. They wouldn't commit the adultery by taking the woman from the man. Besides, he'd come back with armies and, try to kill him, and they'd have a mess. And no, they didn't want to do that. They just do it the easy way. We'll just take out the man. We'll just take out the husband. Then there's no problem. Some of you may not have known that what Abram was saying was a true statement. Kind of. It was a half-truth. Half-truths are half the truth. Half of it. And this is the part that was true. She was half sister. Yes. They had the same father, but they had a different mother. Now, we kind of, how can this man of God do something like this? Well, again, we're before the 10 Commandments. We're before God begins to lay down some of his laws. We're before all of that. He's raising up people in some cultures that didn't practice this at all. So he's got to get them away from that culture. He's going slowly. He always works a lot slower than we want. At least anybody found him working very fast in your life? Most of the time it's very slow. Later, God warns against it. You must not take many wives or your heart will be led astray in Deuteronomy, and that's before some of the other statements that he made. So Abram is comfortable with his half-truths. The problem with half-truths is that they rest on half-lies. And what part of this is going to get you into trouble? The lie part. The lie part. And it's what happened here. Besides, I like to say Sarah was half his sister, but she was not half his wife. It's even more complicated situation as soon as they enter Egypt, because Pharaoh's leaders did see she's a beautiful woman. They heard that she was his sister. They tell Pharaoh. Pharaoh wants to take her, put her in his harem. And now this is a bigger problem than Abram even understood, because Sarah in Pharaoh's harem is in danger of impurity at this point. If Pharaoh decides to take Sarah as another wife, she cannot be the covenant partner. Do you see that? That's an important point. Because God was going to raise up all through, he was raising up a pure people to be his pure light, not to be a pure race for racial reasons, to be a pure light, to so completely reflect who God is, right? Well, they did about as bad a job as we're doing, but we try. So this was a real problem. And what God does here is raises his hand for Sarah. In Scripture, something has happened. At the same time, evidently, when Abram and Sarah come in to Egypt, some serious virus attacks everyone in a very serious way, could lead to death. It is over the whole household. It is just spread. I have a couple of reasons why Pharaoh began to suspect that Abram was at the source of it, possibly because Sarah was the only one who didn't get sick. Or it happened so at the same time that he put two and two together and made this assumption that something must be going on. And he wasn't afraid of saying, it must be your God. He wasn't afraid of having multiple gods. So this was just another God coming in, exercising his authority. And he was a little worried that it was affecting his household this way. Any of those could be right, or it could be something still completely different. He sends, he accuses Abram of lying, right? I mean, Abram doesn't even have a chance to answer, and then sends him away with lots of cattle, lots of maid and male servants, and so he sends him away with more than he had to begin with. He's a richer man for what he did. I don't like that. That's only if you play the 1 + 1 = 2. But sometimes it doesn't in the way God puts math together. It just is. He now has more wealth while he needs it to buy more food. Who did God rescue? Sarah. And Abram got to go home too. But he rescued Sarah. Why? Because she was such a good girl? No, she was a woman of potential. And he was shaping her and had more work to do. And she didn't create this situation. Now, that doesn't mean, I've learned a long time ago, God doesn't work by formulas. Once I get a formula, I can apply it, and then God has to do what the formula says. No, he doesn't work by formulas. So it's not simply every time someone's in a vulnerable situation you didn't make, God's going to rescue you like he did Sarah, but he's going to be there to help you for sure. Absolutely. Can you believe that this whole story happens again? Abram, you are a slow learner. Not until chapter 20 does it happen again. They're in a different country. I'm doing this out of order because I want you to see the two of these stories back to back. We might miss the lesson if it didn't happen again. Sarah has already received information that she's going to have a baby, and she doesn't quite know what to do with that at the age of 89, as none of us would understand what to do with that. They had moved to a country called Gerar. It was on the edge of Philistine country. And when they got into the country, and it was a pagan country, Abram did the same thing he did before. He said to Sarah, "Say you are my sister so that they will not kill me." I don't know who had the worst memory in all this, but somebody needs some memory work here. But she did it again and again when she got there, even at the age of 89. Can you believe it? They were still calling her a beautiful woman, and she was someone who was wanted by the king of Gerar, Abimelech, to come into whatever he called his group of women, waiting women. Again, she's in trouble. And again, God does not work through Abram. He works through the pagan king. He works through the pagan king, Abimelech. He awakes him in a kind of a vision that is so real. He thinks he's talking to somebody that's in his room, and they have a conversation. God says very clearly, "You are a dead man, for the woman you took is married." Abimelech has morals. Can you believe it? A pagan man has morals. He would not do that. That's not part of the way he operates. He did not know she was married. And he tries to say to God, "I didn't know that. I didn't touch her. I didn't touch her. Nothing's wrong. Give me a break." And God says, "I know you didn't touch her. And you didn't touch her because I wouldn't let you." It says that in scripture. I would not let you touch her. Who is God protecting? Sarah. Not because she's a good girl, because she's a woman of potential. And God wants to use her, as he does all of us, because everyone he creates is a child of potential. Everyone God creates is a child of potential. Always. There are no dead ends in God's heart. I really believe that. Abimelech pleads his moral innocence, and then, God says, okay, give Sarah back and have Abram pray for you. Wait a minute. Here's another twist in the story I don't quite understand. I thought he's the one that caused this problem, and you want Abram to pray for Abimelech? Maybe it is a kind of reinstatement. You know, Abram's eyes has been opened, and we never hear of this plot being used again. So maybe he finally got his head on straight about this. And Abram prays at the end because he's found out and it's common knowledge that the women, even before they moved into Gerar, probably all of the women in the household had stopped having babies, all of them. And so they're not barren because they had babies, but they'd stopped having babies. Something had happened. And maybe Abram and Sarah, being a little sensitive to that kind of plight, understood what they were against. And so when Abram prays for King Abimelech, he prays for all of the women who are barren. And who is standing beside him? Sarah. Is it possible that this is the moment when God opened Sarah's womb? Maybe. Maybe not. Some take the idea that she was already showing pregnancy, although the Bible doesn't say that, but she, maybe not. But it is an interesting story. And the truth that God is working in Sarah's life is so prevalent. And I just scream at the fact, why haven't I heard that? We need that lesson today. I have time for one more journey, right? The last journey I want to talk about is her journey from self-will of self-will. And, to say that Sarah was an independent woman is really an understatement. She became a very independent woman. In the marriage between Abram and Sarah, we have some dialogue. And so we know that if she didn't like something, she brought it to Abram pretty quickly and wanted something changed. So she is already, this is earlier than the story I just shared about Abimelech. So this is when she's still working through her barrenness. Abram has a way of trying to address the barrenness, and she has a way of addressing the barrenness, and God's going to use neither. Note to self, maybe God doesn't need my list. We know what a greatest fear is, but what she does is takes a cultural law. I mean, it was fully accepted. Nobody would have said anything about it. No one would have gasped. She could take her maidservant, give her to Abram. This was a surrogacy plan in the old-fashioned way. And then the child that came from that union would be the child belonging to the husband and the wife, not the maidservant. Most of you know enough about the story to know it didn't quite work out that way. But that's what the law agreed to. And so Sarah takes Hagar. It's the first time we hear more about her story, and gives her to Abram. And of course, very quickly, she gets pregnant. And when she's pregnant, she plays all of the switches she can play. She punches all the buttons she can play. Oh, maybe I just don't feel good. I'm having a bad morning this morning, and she's carrying the air. What's a girl to do, So she's kind of milking maybe and mistreating Sarah in the process, and Sarah comes back with her own little bites. We don't know exactly what is said before, but it's bad enough that Hagar runs away into the desert. Now, in case you didn't know, it's not a good idea for a pregnant woman to run into the desert without provisions, which is what she did. She didn't have anything. She's dehydrated. She's about to die. And God shows up for pagan Hagar. Another part of the story that's so beautiful, I don't have time to. One day I'm going to do just a lesson on that. Sends her back, and a miracle of miracles, Hagar obeys the angel voice that says, go back to Sarah. That's where you belong. That's where you're going to be safe. Go back. And she does. And all we know about the time between when Hagar gives birth to Ishmael and Sarah's relationship is that somehow they found a way to stay far away enough from each other that they could live in the same area and not have a cat fight. But it wasn't a pleasant time. Shaping. God is shaping Sarah, but now she's taken things into her own hands and made a mess of things. Later on, and in the story before, God rescues her. Why doesn't he rescue her here? Why doesn't he keep her hand from making this kind of terrible thing? We would all have prayed. If we could send our prayers backwards, we would pray, please don't let Hagar have Ishmael. But you know, when we are bent on doing things our own way, God kind of says, okay, let's see how that works for you. And it didn't work so well for Sarah. So again, it's a shaping lesson. Is she getting the messages? Oh, I don't think so. Not right now. It's one by one, but she's going to, and we're going to hear about that story next week. This morning, I want to pray that in our transitions, in our times of vulnerability, no matter what has caused them, and in the moments when we think we should take matters into our own hands, we will go to the God who knows us and wants to shape us for good in that moment with those circumstances. And maybe we'll see what could happen. May I pray for you? Father, you know our lives. You know our hearts. You know the thoughts that rumble around in our heads that help us and hurt us. Will you come with a word today through the music of worship, through the word of your scripture, your word proclaimed, and remind us to listen carefully to what you are doing in our lives, to ask over and over again that you would continue to shape us, and that we will never forget that there is never a moment or a year in our lives that we cannot be clay in your hands on your potter's wheel to be shaped and to become the person you always know we could be. Amen. Reminding you, I've got the sign-up sheet right back there on the table.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Our lessons are always just priceless, just priceless. And we thank you. I hope everybody has a good week and just reach out to someone you know, whether they're in the class or not, but reach out to them. Thank you. Have a good week. Thank you.